crystal chandelier above me swayed with the ship's movement, casting fractured light across the polished mahogany of the upper deck lounge. I'd been calculating the same spreadsheet for 20 minutes, my fingers cramping around the stylus as I tried to reconcile numbers that refused to balance. The cruise liner's gentle rock had become background noise after 3 days at sea, something my body anticipated and adjusted for automatically. Until it didn't. The ship lurched violently to starboard, a movement so sudden and severe that my tablet flew from my hands. I heard the collective gasp of other passengers, the crash of glassware from the bar, and felt my own body become weightless for a heartbeat before gravity reasserted itself with cruel efficiency. My sensible heels, chosen specifically for their grip on ship flooring, lost purchase on the suddenly tilted deck. I fell, not gracefully, not with any dignity. My arms windmilled uselessly as I careened sideways, directly into the private seating area I'd been carefully avoiding all afternoon. The impact was softer than the floor would have been, which my brain registered half a second before the rest of my senses caught up. I'd landed directly in someone's lap. Warm, solid, unmistakably male. The scent of cedar and something darker, more expensive than any cologne I could name, surrounded me. Beneath my palms, I felt the texture of fine wool, tailored so precisely it might as well have been a second skin. My face was inches from a chest that radiated heat through the fabric of what I now recognized as a charcoal suit that probably cost more than the entire ship's food service budget for a week. "I'm so sorry," I gasped, already trying to extract myself from this mortifying situation. My professional reputation on this ship depended on being competent, invisible, the financial consultant who solved problems without creating them. Landing in a first-class passenger's lap was decidedly not part of that image. But the hands that settled on my waist weren't pushing me away. They were steady, almost possessive, holding me in place with a firmness that sent an unexpected shiver down my spine. "Stay there a little longer." The voice was low, accented with something Mediterranean I couldn't quite place, and carried the kind of authority that made my automatic apology die in my throat. I looked up, finally, and met eyes the color of espresso, dark and assessing, set in a face that belonged on Renaissance sculptures. Sharp jawline, olive skin, black hair swept back with casual precision. He was older than me, maybe early 40s, with the kind of face that had seen things, done things, and remained unbothered by all of it. "The ship is still settling," he continued, his thumbs making small circles against the fabric of my conservative blazer. "Wait until it's safe." It was a reasonable statement, logical even. The ship was still correcting from whatever wave or current had caused the violent tilt. Around us, other passengers were picking up dropped items, checking on companions, laughing nervously at the unexpected excitement. The bartender was sweeping up broken glass with practiced efficiency. But logic had nothing to do with why I remained frozen in this stranger's lap. My heart hammering against my ribs in a rhythm that had nothing to do with the fall and everything to do with the way he was looking at me. Like he was reading a balance sheet and finding the numbers infinitely more interesting than he'd expected. "Helena?" Eduarda's voice cut through the moment like an auditor finding a discrepancy. My colleague appeared at my elbow, her auburn hair slightly disheveled from the ship's movement, concern written across her freckled face. "Are you hurt?" The stranger's hands loosened, but didn't disappear entirely. One remained at my waist as I finally, awkwardly, extracted myself and stood. My legs felt unsteady, though whether from the ship or from the encounter, I couldn't say. "I'm fine," I managed, smoothing down my skirt with hands that wanted to shake. "Just clumsy. Hardly clumsy when the ship decides to dance," the man said, rising with fluid grace. Standing, he was taller than I'd expected, broad-shouldered in a way that suggested regular physical activity rather than gym vanity. He extended a hand, formal now, as if we hadn't just been intimately entangled. "Balthazar Suarez." His handshake was firm, brief, and left my palm tingling. I noticed the watch then, visible beneath his cuff. I didn't recognize the brand, but I recognized value when I saw it. The kind of timepiece that showed up in estate auctions with 5-figure minimum bids. Helena, I replied, deliberately omitting my surname. Something about this man made me want to maintain boundaries, to keep some part of myself separate from whatever this was. I really am sorry about... Don't be. His smile was slight, more suggestion than expression, but it transformed his face from merely handsome to dangerously compelling. It's been the most interesting thing to happen since we left port. Eduarda cleared her throat, a sound I recognized as her diplomatic intervention signal. Helena, Edmundo needs us in the business center. The Carvalho portfolio has some questions about the fund allocations. Of course. I bent to retrieve my tablet from where it had skidded across the floor, grateful for the excuse to break eye contact with Baltazar Soares. When I straightened, he was still watching me, that same assessing look that made me feel like he was calculating something I couldn't see. Perhaps we'll meet again, he said. It's a small ship. Perhaps, I echoed, though every professional instinct I possessed was screaming at me to avoid this man for the remaining 4 days of the cruise. There was something about him, something that went beyond mere attraction. A sense of danger, of complexity, of waters far deeper than I was equipped to navigate. Eduarda linked her arm through mine as we walked away, her voice low. Do you know who that is? Should I? She waited until we were well out of earshot, steering me toward the elevator that would take us to the ship's business center on Deck 7. That's Baltazar Soares. I overheard the purser talking about him yesterday. He owns the Aurora casino chain, those high-end places in Monaco, Singapore, Macau. I frowned, pulling up mental files of investment portfolios I'd reviewed. Aurora isn't publicly traded. Exactly. Eduarda's expression was troubled. Word is he keeps it private for a reason, the kind of reason that involves very specific clientele and very specific services that exist in legal gray areas. My stomach tightened. I'd spent my entire career in legitimate finance, building a reputation for ethical consulting, for finding ways to maximize returns without crossing lines. The world Eduarda was describing existed parallel to mine, close enough to touch, but carefully avoided by anyone with sense. Then I'll make sure our paths don't cross again, I said firmly, though my waist still felt warm where his hands had rested. The business center was a glass-walled office space overlooking the ocean, currently occupied by Edmundo Vieira, the ship's senior hospitality manager, and a man I didn't recognize. Thin, 50s, with the kind of nervous energy that suggested either too much coffee or too much conscience. Helena, thank you for coming. Edmundo gestured us to the conference table. This is Ernesto Cardoso, a business associate who has some concerns about documentation for an investment opportunity. I settled into consultant mode automatically, the familiar rhythm of numbers and analysis pushing aside the lingering heat of an unwanted attraction. Ernesto slid a folder across the table, and I opened it to find a prospectus for a hotel development project in the Algarve region. The numbers looked solid on the surface. Projected returns in the reasonable range for hospitality ventures, risk assessments that seemed appropriately conservative. But something nagged at me as I scanned the documentation. A feeling I'd learned to trust over 15 years of reviewing financial instruments, the same instinct that had saved clients from fraudulent schemes and Ponzi operations disguised as legitimate investments. These construction cost estimates, I said slowly, running my finger down the spreadsheet. They're unusually precise for a project still in the planning phase. Typically at this stage, you'd see wider variance ranges. Ernesto's smile was tight. We've been very thorough in our planning. And the land acquisition documents, I continued, flipping to the property deeds. The notary stamps look correct, but the registration numbers. I pulled out my own tablet, accessing the Portuguese property registry database through my secure connection. These parcels aren't showing as recently transferred. In fact, They're still listed under the original family trust that's owned them for 40 years. The silence in the room grew heavy. Ernesto's nervous energy transformed into something harder, more focused. Perhaps there's a delay in the registry updating. Perhaps, I agreed, my tone professional but unmoved. Or perhaps someone is trying to sell property rights they don't actually possess. Edmundo's face had gone carefully neutral, the expression of a man trying to determine which side of a situation was safer. Eduarda, to her credit, simply pulled out her own tablet and began cross-referencing the documents with her usual methodical precision. "I think we're done here," Ernesto said abruptly, reaching for the folder. "Clearly this isn't the right venue for this investment." "Clearly," I agreed, making no move to stop him as he gathered his materials and left. His departure marked by an underlying current of threat that made the hair on the back of my neck rise. After he was gone, Edmundo let out a long breath. "That man is connected to Baltazar Suarez. They're business partners in several ventures." The name sent an unwelcome jolt through me. Then perhaps someone should warn Mr. Suarez that his partner is circulating fraudulent documents. "Perhaps," Edmundo said carefully. "Someone already has. And perhaps that's why Mr. Suarez is on this particular cruise, at this particular time." I met his eyes, understanding blooming. "He's investigating his own partner." I couldn't possibly comment on passenger business. Edmundo's tone was diplomatic, but his message was clear. "However, I would note that financial consultants with your particular expertise might find themselves with unexpected opportunities to do what they do best." After he left, Eduarda turned to me with a mixture of concern and excitement. "Helena, you can't seriously be considering getting involved with whatever this is. These aren't the kind of people who operate in our world." She was right. Everything about this situation screamed danger, complexity, the kind of entanglement that could destroy the careful, ethical career I'd built. Baltazar Suarez was not a client I should want. His world was not one I should enter. But I thought about those dark eyes, that assessing gaze, the way his hands had felt steady and certain when the world tilted beneath me. I thought about Ernesto's fraudulent documents, the attempt to steal using forgery and deception, the kind of financial crime I'd spent my career fighting. "I'm going to think about it," I said finally. That evening, I stood on my balcony, watching the sun set over the Mediterranean in shades of amber and rose. The ship had stabilized, its gentle rock now familiar and almost comforting. 4 more days at sea before we reached Barcelona. 4 more days in close quarters with a man who made me feel unsteady in ways that had nothing to do with ocean swells. A soft knock at my cabin door interrupted my thoughts. I found Eduarda standing there, holding a cream-colored envelope with my name written in bold, masculine handwriting. "This was just delivered to the purser's desk for you," she said, curiosity written across her face. Inside was a single card, heavy stock, expensive. The message was brief. "Dinner, 8 o'clock, the captain's table. We have much to discuss regarding mutual interests. B.S. Not a request, not quite a command. Something in between, carrying the same authority as that voice telling me to stay in his lap a little longer. I should decline, should maintain my professional boundaries, my ethical standards, my carefully constructed life that had no room for dangerous men with espresso eyes and Mediterranean accents. Instead, I found myself opening my closet, considering what one wore to dinner with a man who owned casinos and commanded rooms with his presence alone. My hand landed on a navy dress, elegant but not provocative, professional but with enough sophistication to hold my own in whatever game this was becoming. Because I was going. Against every logical instinct, every professional warning, I was walking directly into deep water with a man who might drown me. But first, I was going to make him work for every step. The captain's table occupied a private alcove on the uppermost dining deck, separated from the main restaurant by frosted glass panels etched with nautical designs. I arrived exactly on time, a small power play that said I respected punctuality but wouldn't arrive early and wait for him like some nervous supplicant. Balthazar was already there. He rose as I approached, and I noted the precision of the movement, the way he tracked my progress across the room with the focus of someone accustomed to gathering information from observation. Tonight he wore black, a suit that absorbed light rather than reflecting it, making his olive skin and dark eyes even more striking by contrast. Helena. My name and his accent carried weights I couldn't decipher. Thank you for accepting my invitation. Your invitation didn't leave much room for refusal, I replied, allowing him to pull out my chair. The courtesy felt anachronistic, a gesture from another era that somehow fit him perfectly. Would you have preferred a refusal to be an option? He settled across from me, and I caught the ghost of amusement in his expression. I had the impression you were a woman who appreciated directness. A server appeared with wine, a vintage I didn't recognize, but that probably cost more than my monthly salary. I waited until we were alone again before responding. I appreciate honesty, I corrected. Directness without honesty is just manipulation with better packaging. Something flickered in those dark eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. Then let me be both direct and honest. I know what happened this afternoon with Ernesto Cardoso. I know you identified the fraudulent property documents in under 5 minutes. I need someone with your skills. I took a sip of wine, using the moment to steady myself. The vintage was complex, layered, the kind of thing that revealed new dimensions with each taste. Like the man across from me. What makes you think I'd be interested in working with someone in your particular line of business? Because despite what you may have heard about my enterprises, I operate within legal boundaries. Gray areas, perhaps, but never black. And because someone is trying to destroy what I've built using the exact kind of fraud you've spent your career fighting. The server returned with our first course, some delicate construction of seafood and microgreens that looked like edible art. I waited until we were alone again. Ernesto Cardoso is your business partner. Was, Balthazar corrected, though he doesn't know it yet. We've been partners for 12 years. He helped me build Aurora from a single casino in Macau to a network spanning 3 continents. I trusted him with financial operations, with expansion planning, with access to documents and accounts that could bury me if used incorrectly. And he's using them incorrectly. Balthazar's jaw tightened, the first crack in his controlled facade. He's creating parallel investments, using Aurora's reputation and my contacts to guarantee loans for projects that don't exist. The Algarve Hotel is just one. There are others in Dubai, in Singapore, in Monaco. He's been funneling money into offshore accounts, building an empire of air and forged documents. I set down my fork, my appetite suddenly gone. How much? Conservatively, 40 million euros, possibly more. The number hung between us like smoke. I'd dealt with corporate fraud before, embezzlement schemes that cost companies millions. But those were abstractions, numbers on balance sheets for faceless corporations. This was personal. This was a man watching something he'd built, being dismantled by betrayal. Why tell me? I asked. Why not hire a forensic accountant, bring in investigators, handle this through proper legal channels? Balthazar leaned back, his expression hardening into something colder. Because Ernesto has connections. Judges, officials, people who owe him favors or fear his influence. If I move through traditional channels, he'll know before the ink dries on the complaint. He'll disappear with the money, leaving me to untangle the legal mess while my reputation crumbles and my investors flee. So you want me to help you build a case quietly? I want you to help me destroy him completely. The words were soft, almost gentle, which made them more chilling. I want every fraudulent document exposed, every forged signature highlighted, every stolen euro traced back to his accounts. I want him to have nowhere to run, No one to turn to. Nothing left but the consequences of his choices. I should have been appalled, should have recognized the vindictiveness in his words, the darkness that went beyond simple justice. Instead, I found myself calculating timelines, considering methodologies, my mind already mapping out the forensic trail needed to build an airtight case. I work alone, I said finally. I won't participate in anything illegal, and I maintain complete control over the investigation. If I find evidence, I decide how and when it's used. Baltazar's smile was slow, dangerous, satisfied. Agreed. And when this is over, we're done. No further entanglement, no ongoing obligations. Of course. But the way he said it, the slight emphasis on the word, suggested he didn't believe that any more than I did. We finished dinner discussing logistics. He would arrange access to Aurora's financial records, providing passwords and encryption keys for digital files, physical access to document archives stored in a secure facility in Monaco. I would need 3 days, maybe 4, to complete a preliminary analysis. The ship docks in Barcelona in 4 days, I noted. That doesn't leave much time. Then we'll continue in Monaco. I own a property there, plenty of space, complete privacy. You can work without interruption. Every professional instinct screamed warnings. Going to Monaco, to his property, crossing that line from shipboard consultation to something more intimate, more dangerous. But the challenge called to something deeper than professional curiosity. The puzzle of it, the complexity, the way numbers could reveal truth when everything else was lies. I'll think about it, I said, though we both knew what my answer would be. Baltazar walked me back to my cabin, a courtesy that felt more like possession the way his hand rested at the small of my back, guiding me through corridors I knew perfectly well. At my door, he paused, standing close enough that I caught that cedar scent again, warm and intoxicating. "You're not what I expected," he said quietly. "What did you expect?" "Someone more, pliable, someone who would be impressed by money and power enough to ask fewer questions." I met his eyes steadily. "Then you invited the wrong consultant." "No." His hand came up, fingers brushing my jaw with unexpected gentleness. "I invited exactly the right one." The kiss, when it came, was inevitable as gravity. His mouth found mine with the same precision he brought to everything else, confident but not demanding, an invitation rather than a conquest. I felt myself lean into it, my hands finding the lapels of his jacket, holding on as the world tilted again. When we pulled apart, my breath was unsteady. His wasn't. "Good night, Helena," he said, his voice rougher than before. "Think about Monaco." He left me there, my lips still burning, my heart racing with something that had nothing to do with financial fraud, and everything to do with the way he'd looked at me like I was a puzzle he intended to solve. Inside my cabin, I found Eduarda sitting on my bed, laptop open, expression grim. "I've been researching Baltazar Suarez," she said without preamble. "Helena, this man isn't just a casino owner. He's connected to families in Italy, Sicily, people who don't show up in normal business registries. The Aurora casinos cater to clients who launder money through high-stakes games, who use his properties for meetings that never appear on any official schedule. He operates in gray areas," I said, echoing his own words, "not black. The difference is semantic when you're the one caught in the middle." Eduarda closed her laptop. "I'm your friend. I'm telling you this is dangerous. Whatever he's offering you, it's not worth it." I thought about Ernesto's fraudulent documents, about 40 million euros stolen through deception. I thought about Baltazar's hands on my waist, steady when the world moved beneath me. I thought about the kiss that still lingered on my lips. "I know it's dangerous," I admitted, "but I'm going to do it anyway." The next 3 days blurred together in a haze of encrypted files and financial records. Baltazar had provided access to everything, a level of transparency that surprised me until I realized it was also a test. He was letting me see the full scope of his operations, trusting me with information that could destroy him as surely as Ernesto's fraud. The Aurora casinos were exactly what Eduarda had described. Legitimate on the surface, profitable businesses that paid taxes and employed hundreds. But underneath, I saw the patterns. Transactions that moved through the casinos in ways designed to obscure origin and destination. High-stakes players whose winnings and losses followed statistical patterns that suggested coordination rather than chance. Money laundering. Not on Aurora's part, but facilitated by its existence, its privacy policies, its clientele who valued discretion above all else. I should have walked away. Should have recognized that proving Ernesto's fraud would mean diving deeper into a world I'd deliberately avoided. Instead, I followed the numbers, tracing the false transactions, identifying the forged signatures, building a case that would stand up in any court willing to hear it. And every evening, I had dinner with Baltazar. We didn't discuss the investigation during those meals. Instead, we talked about other things. His childhood in Genoa, the son of a shipping merchant who'd taught him that information was more valuable than cargo. My own upbringing in Porto, the daughter of school teachers who'd instilled in me a belief that numbers didn't lie even when people did. "You became a financial consultant to fight fraud," he observed one night, over dessert that neither of us was eating. "Because you believe in truth through mathematics." "Numbers are clean," I agreed. "They follow rules. Add up correctly or they don't. No gray areas." "Everything has gray areas," Baltazar countered. "The art is knowing which ones matter." On the fourth morning, we docked in Barcelona. I stood on my balcony watching the city come into focus, spires and modernist architecture rising against a brilliant blue sky. This was where I should disembark, return to my normal life, my ethical practice, my world of clear boundaries. My phone buzzed with a message. "Baltazar. The jet leaves at noon. I'll have someone collect your luggage." Not a question, not a request. The same assumption of compliance that should have irritated me, but instead sent an illicit thrill down my spine. Eduarda found me in my cabin, packing. "You're really going with him?" "I'm going to Monaco to complete the investigation," I corrected. "It's a professional engagement." "Helena?" She caught my hand, her expression serious. "I've known you for 8 years. I've never seen you look at a man the way you look at him. And I've never seen you this willing to compromise your principles." "I'm not compromising anything," I insisted. "I'm building a fraud case. That's what I do." "That's what you're telling yourself." She squeezed my hand. "Just promise me you know what you're getting into, and that you'll call me if you need extraction." At noon precisely, a car arrived to take me to the private airfield. Baltazar's jet was smaller than I'd expected, elegant rather than ostentatious, all cream leather and polished wood. He was already aboard, working on a laptop, but looked up as I entered. "You came." I said I would consider Monaco. I considered. His smile was slight but genuine. "And what did you conclude?" I settled into the seat across from him, meeting his eyes directly. "That I'm going to expose every fraudulent transaction Ernesto Cardoso has made. And then I'm going to walk away from all of this with my conscience clear." "Of course," Baltazar agreed, but his eyes held that same knowing look from the first night. "Whatever you need to tell yourself, Helena." As the jet lifted into the Mediterranean sky, I realized I was no longer calculating the forensic trail of Ernesto's fraud. I was calculating how many days I could justify staying in Monaco before the investigation was complete. And hoping, against all logic and professional judgment, that it would take longer than expected. Monaco appeared through the jet window like a jewel set into the coastline, all white buildings and blue water, wealth concentrated into impossible density. The principality had always existed in my mind as an abstraction, a place where clients invested but that I'd never visited. Seeing it in person felt surreal, like stepping into a photograph. Baltazar's property turned out to be an understatement of magnificent proportions. The penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of a building overlooking the harbor, with floor-to-ceiling windows that transformed the Mediterranean into living artwork. My suite alone was larger than my entire apartment in Lisbon, all marble and silk and views that made my breath catch. The office is on the 2nd floor, Baltazar explained, leading me through rooms that felt more like museum galleries than living spaces. I've had all of Aurora's financial records transferred there. Paper documents, digital files, everything you requested. The office was a consultant's dream. 3 monitors, encrypted servers, a document scanner that looked like it belonged in an intelligence agency, and filing cabinets that held years of Aurora's operational history. On the central desk sat a leather folder containing what I recognized immediately as the core evidence. Ernesto's falsified Algarve project, I said, opening it, along with the Dubai and Singapore ventures, and 3 others I only discovered after you identified the pattern on the ship. Baltazar's voice held controlled fury. 6 fraudulent projects, all using Aurora's credentials, all generating loans that went directly into his accounts. I spread the documents across the desk, my mind automatically organizing them into categories. Loan applications, property deeds, construction estimates, investor prospectuses. Each one meticulously crafted, each one containing subtle tells that marked them as forgeries. This will take me several days to properly document, I said, already pulling up financial tracking software on the monitors. Maybe a week if the trail is as complex as I think it is. Take whatever time you need. I have business in the city, meetings I can't postpone, but I'll be back each evening. He left me there, surrounded by evidence of betrayal, and I dove into the work with the focus that had built my career. Numbers became my language, spreadsheets my syntax, each transaction a sentence in the story of Ernesto's fraud. By evening, I'd traced the first project's money trail through 4 shell corporations and 2 offshore banks. The sophistication impressed me, even as it appalled me. Ernesto hadn't just stolen. He'd built an entire false empire, complete with fake employees, fictional construction companies, and forged government approvals. Find anything interesting? Baltazar's voice from the doorway made me jump. I'd been so absorbed I hadn't heard him return. Your partner is brilliant, I admitted. Criminally brilliant. Look at this. I pulled up a schematic showing the money flow. He created an entire ecosystem of false companies, each one supporting the other's legitimacy. Any single verification would pass inspection, because every reference checks out. It's only when you map the whole network that you see they're all connected to the same source. Baltazar moved to stand behind my chair, close enough that I felt his presence like heat. Can you prove it? I can prove it so thoroughly that no judge on earth would question the evidence. But that's not the question, is it? I turned to face him. The question is whether you want legal proof or something else. His hand came to rest on the back of my chair, caging me in without touching me. What else would I want? Revenge. Justice outside the courtroom. The kind of outcome where Ernesto doesn't just lose in court. He loses everything before the trial even begins. And if I wanted both? His eyes held mine, dark and intense. Legal destruction and personal ruin. Could you help me achieve that? I should have said no. Should have drawn the line at legitimate evidence gathering. Refused to participate in anything that crossed into vigilante territory. Instead, I heard myself say, "Tell me about him. About how this partnership began." Baltazar stepped back, moving to the window that overlooked the harbor. Lights were coming on across the principality, transforming it into a constellation of wealth and power. I met Ernesto 12 years ago in Macau, he began. I was 30, trying to build my first casino with capital I'd scraped together through shipping investments. He was a financial consultant like you, with expertise in Asian markets and regulatory frameworks. He helped me navigate licenses, establish banking relationships, build the operational structure that made Aurora possible. You trusted him. He earned that trust. For a decade, he was loyal, competent, essential. When we expanded to Singapore, he handled the financing. Monaco, he structured the ownership to maximize tax advantages while maintaining legal compliance. I gave him 20% of Aurora because he'd contributed 20% of its success. I heard the pain beneath the controlled recitation, the betrayal that cut deeper than financial loss. When did you first suspect? 6 months ago. Small things at first. Delays in reports. Vague explanations for certain transactions. Meetings with investors I didn't recognize. I started my own investigation, quietly, using contacts who wouldn't report back to him. And found the fraud. Found the tip of it. What you've uncovered in one day exceeds what my investigators found in 6 months. You see patterns they missed, connections that weren't obvious. He turned back to face me. You're exceptional at this, Helena. It's not just expertise, it's instinct. The compliment warmed me more than it should. I've spent 15 years learning to read what numbers don't say as clearly as what they do. Every fraudster has habits, patterns they don't recognize in themselves. Ernesto's pattern is complexity. He believes that enough layers of sophistication will obscure simple theft. But you see through the complexity. Always. I stood, moving to the evidence board I'd started constructing, connecting documents with red string and patterns that mapped the fraud structure. Give me 3 more days, and I'll have everything you need to destroy him in court. But if you want more than that, if you want him ruined before the legal system touches him, you'll need to tell me what kind of world you actually operate in. Baltazar was quiet for a long moment. Then he moved to a panel in the wall, pressing his palm against it. A hidden safe opened, revealing documents that made my stomach tighten. Client lists. Not just casino patrons, but names I recognized from international news. Diplomats, corporate executives, family heads from organizations that operated in shadows. Betting records that showed wins and losses too convenient to be chance. Transaction patterns that screamed coordination. Aurora is legitimate, he said quietly. But it serves clients who are not. I provide a service, Helena. Privacy, discretion, a place where money can move without questions. I don't ask what they're laundering or why they need to place bets that lose exactly the right amount at exactly the right time. I just provide the venue. Gray areas, I whispered. The grayest? I pay my taxes, follow gaming regulations, maintain licenses in every jurisdiction. But I also look the other way when my VIP clients use my casinos for purposes I prefer not to examine too closely. That's the real Aurora. That's what Ernesto is destroying with his fraud, not just stealing money, but threatening relationships with people who don't forgive threats. He closed the safe, and I realized my hands were shaking. Not with fear, but with the weight of choice. I could walk away now, leave this evidence and this man, and return to my clean, ethical, limited life. Or I could step fully into the gray, accepting that truth through numbers didn't always align with truth through law. If I help you, I said slowly, I need to understand the endgame. What happens to Ernesto when we expose him? Legally, he faces fraud charges, asset seizure, probably 15 years in prison. But before that happens, before any court sees this evidence, I'll use it to destroy his reputation with our mutual contacts. He'll lose access to the networks that gave him power. The people he's borrowed from, the investors he's defrauded using Aurora's name, they'll all know what he did, and they'll respond accordingly. Accordingly, I repeated. Meaning what, exactly? Baltazar's expression was stone, meaning he'll be lucky if prison is where he ends up. The people he's crossed don't wait for court systems to deliver justice. You're asking me to help you sentence him to death. I'm asking you to help me expose the truth. What happens after that is consequence, not sentence. He chose this path when he started stealing from people who don't accept apologies. I turned back to my evidence board, my mind calculating possibilities, outcomes, the mathematics of moral choice. Everything I'd built my career on said I should refuse, should limit my involvement to legal evidence gathering, should maintain the boundaries that separated legitimate consulting from criminal collaboration. But I thought about Ernesto's false documents, about the sophisticated system he'd built to steal from someone who'd trusted him. I thought about victims beyond Baltazar, the investors who'd put money into fictional projects, the legitimate businesses that would suffer when Aurora's reputation crumbled under the weight of associated fraud. 3 days, I said finally. Give me 3 days, and I'll map every transaction, every forged document, every stolen euro. I'll build you a case so airtight that even his connections can't save him. And then I walk away before you use it. Before I use it, Baltazar repeated. Not if. When you use it, I corrected. Because we both know you will. I just won't be here to watch. He moved closer, his hand coming to rest against my cheek, warm and certain. You keep telling yourself you're going to walk away from this. From me. Do you really believe that, Helena? I should have stepped back, should have maintained professional distance. Instead, I leaned into his touch, my eyes closing for a heartbeat. I have to believe it. Because the alternative is admitting that I'm willing to compromise everything I've built for a man I barely know. You know me. His thumb traced my jawline. Maybe not my history or my business, but you know me. The way I know you. We recognized something in each other on that ship. Something that goes deeper than profession or ethics. Danger, I whispered. We recognized danger. No. His lips brushed my temple, soft and devastating. We recognized possibility. The kiss that followed was different from the one on the ship. That had been exploration, testing boundaries. This was claiming, a statement of intent that left no room for pretense. His hands slid into my hair, tilting my head back as his mouth moved over mine with focused intensity, and I responded with an abandon that should have terrified me. When we finally pulled apart, my professional facade was in tatters. I clung to his shoulders, breathing hard, my carefully constructed boundaries in ruins around us. This is insane, I managed. Probably. He didn't sound concerned. But you're still going to help me destroy Ernesto. And then you're going to try to convince yourself that you're walking away. And I'm going to prove to you that you won't. That sounds like a challenge. His smile was dangerous, promising. Everything with you is a challenge. That's why I can't let you go. He left me in the office, my lips burning and my resolve crumbling, surrounded by evidence of fraud and the growing certainty that I was falling into something far more complex than a financial investigation. I worked until 3 a.m, mapping transaction trails and documenting forgeries, my mind seeking refuge in the clean logic of numbers, even as my body remembered the heat of Baltazar's kiss. By dawn, I'd traced 43 million euros through Ernesto's network. By noon the next day, I'd identified every forged signature, every false company registration, every fraudulent deed. By the time Baltazar returned that evening, I had built him a case that would destroy a man's life. And I was beginning to understand that I'd already crossed every line I'd sworn not to cross. The evidence spread across Baltazar's office looked like abstract art from a distance. Red strings connecting documents in patterns that revealed the architecture of betrayal. Up close, it was brutal mathematics, each connection a documented lie, each intersection a moment where Ernesto had chosen theft over loyalty. "It's comprehensive," I said, as Baltazar studied my work, his expression unreadable. "Every fraudulent transaction traced to source accounts, every forged document cross-referenced against legitimate records, every shell company exposed as fiction. A competent prosecutor could get a conviction with half of this. But you've given me all of it." He moved closer to the board, his fingers tracing one of the red strings. "This company here, Meridian Holdings, you've connected it to 6 different projects. Meridian is the linchpin. Ernesto created it 5 years ago, slowly building its paper legitimacy, so it could serve as guarantor for the later frauds. If you collapse Meridian publicly, if you expose it as a shell, every project it touched becomes immediately suspect. His entire false empire crumbles in sequence." Baltazar turned to me, something like admiration in his dark eyes. "You're not just exposing fraud, you're designing his complete destruction. You asked for thoroughness." I kept my voice professional, though my heart was racing. "This is what thorough looks like." He studied me for a long moment, and I felt that assessing gaze like physical touch. "You've changed your mind about walking away." "I haven't decided anything." "Liar." But his tone held warmth, not accusation. "You're already calculating how this plays out, what happens after Ernesto falls. You're too intelligent not to see where this leads." Where it led was terrifying and intoxicating in equal measure. I'd spent 3 days in Monaco, 3 days where the boundaries between professional investigation and personal involvement had blurred into non-existence. Baltazar and I had fallen into a rhythm, working together during the day, sharing meals in the evening, conversations that ranged from Aurora's operations to my own history and financial consulting. And every night, he kissed me with increasing intensity before leaving me at my suite door, a studied restraint that drove me to distraction. "What I see," I said carefully, "is that when this evidence goes public, you'll need to distance yourself from the fallout. Aurora's reputation will take damage regardless of how thoroughly you separate yourself from Ernesto's fraud. You'll need someone who can manage the financial narrative, someone clients trust to verify that the casinos themselves are clean. Someone like you. I'm saying there's a legitimate consulting role here after the investigation concludes. Short term, 3 to 6 months, helping you rebuild credibility with investors and regulatory bodies." Baltazar's smile was slow, dangerous. "Is that what you're telling yourself this is? A consulting opportunity?" Before I could answer, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression shuddered into something harder. "Ernesto is in Monaco. He's requested a meeting." My stomach tightened. He knows. He suspects, which means we need to move faster than I'd planned. Baltazar was already moving, pulling up files on his laptop. "I'm meeting him tomorrow afternoon at the Aurora Monte Carlo. I want you there." "That's not wise. If he sees me, he needs to see you, needs to understand that his careful fraud has been completely unraveled by someone smarter than him." Baltazar's voice held an edge I recognized, the controlled fury that had been building through days of examining betrayal. "I want him to know exactly how thoroughly he's lost before I destroy him." The vindictiveness should have bothered me more than it did. Instead, I found myself nodding. "What do you need from me?" "Bring the Meridian documentation, the shell company evidence, the forged signatures, the traced transactions. I want you to present it to him directly, professionally, the way you would to any client. Let him see the scope of what you've uncovered." "And then?" "Then I use it to make sure he understands the consequences. Not just legal charges, Helena. The people he's defrauded using Aurora's name, they're already asking questions. When they see this evidence, when they understand how completely he's played them." He left the sentence unfinished, but the implication was clear. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stood on my suite's balcony, watching Monaco's lights reflect off dark water, my mind circling through possibilities and consequences. Tomorrow I would step fully into Baltazar's world, would participate in a confrontation that went beyond professional ethics into something more personal, more dangerous. I should call Eduarda, should ask for that extraction she'd offered. Instead, I found myself thinking about Baltazar's hands on my waist, his voice telling me to stay a little longer, the way he looked at me like I was a puzzle he'd solved and still wanted to keep studying. Can't sleep either. His voice from the doorway made me turn. He'd changed from his suit into dark slacks and a white shirt, unbuttoned at the collar, more relaxed than I'd seen him. I saw your light was still on. Nervous about tomorrow. I gestured for him to join me on the balcony. This is different from building a case in private. This is confrontation. You've confronted fraud before, presented evidence to clients who didn't want to hear it. Never like this, never with stakes that include. I trailed off, unsure how to finish. Violence, Baltazar supplied. Because you know that's what waits for Ernesto once this evidence circulates. People he's stolen from, they won't wait for court systems. I know. The admission felt like confession. And I'm still helping you do this. What does that make me? He moved closer, his hand finding mine on the balcony railing. Human. Flawed. Someone who believes in justice even when it comes through imperfect channels. Or someone who's compromising everything she believes for a man she's known for a week. Is that what you think this is? His fingers threaded through mine, warm and certain. A week of attraction making you abandon your principles? Isn't it? No. He turned me to face him, his free hand coming to rest against my cheek. This is you recognizing that the world has more dimensions than you allowed yourself to see. That sometimes the people operating in gray areas are fighting the same battles you are, just with different weapons. You're not fighting battles, I countered. You're running casinos that launder money for criminals. I provide a service. What my clients do with that service, the money they move, the purposes they serve, that's not my responsibility to police. But when someone uses my business to commit fraud, to steal from people under my protection, to threaten relationships I've spent years building. His jaw tightened. That I take personally. That I destroy. I should have been appalled by the cold calculation in his voice. Instead, I felt myself drawn closer, my free hand finding the open collar of his shirt. And what am I to you? A tool for that destruction. Someone useful who happens to also be attracted to you. His laugh was low, genuine. You're many things, Helena. But tool isn't one of them. You're a woman who sees through complexity to truth, who doesn't flinch from difficult answers, who challenges me at every turn. You're the first person in years who's looked at my world and asked the right questions instead of the easy ones. What are the right questions? Whether the gray areas I operate in serve a purpose beyond profit, whether the service I provide prevents worse alternatives, whether someone can exist in shadows and still have honor. He pulled me closer until our bodies were nearly touching. You're asking those questions every time you look at me, and I don't have answers that will satisfy you. Then why am I still here? Because you recognize that I'm not asking you to abandon your principles. I'm asking you to expand them. To see that sometimes truth and justice don't align perfectly. That sometimes the most ethical choice is the one that produces the best outcome, rather than the cleanest process. His mouth found mine before I could argue, and I surrendered to the kiss with an abandon that confirmed everything he'd said. I was expanding my principles, stretching my ethics, allowing myself to exist in the gray areas I'd spent my career avoiding. And the terrifying part was how right it felt. When we finally pulled apart, I was breathless, my carefully constructed defenses in complete ruins. If I do this tomorrow, I whispered, if I help you destroy Ernesto, there's no going back to who I was before. I know. His forehead rested against mine. And if you can't do it, if you need to walk away before tomorrow's meeting, I'll arrange transport back to Lisbon. No judgment, no consequences. This has to be your choice. It was already my choice. I'd made it the moment I stepped onto his jet in Barcelona, maybe even earlier, in that moment on the ship when I'd fallen into his lap and he'd told me to stay. I'll be there tomorrow, I said, and I'll present the evidence. But after that, after Ernesto knows what's coming for him, I need time, space to process what I've done, who I'm becoming. Time and space, Baltazar agreed, but not distance, not unless that's truly what you want. He kissed me once more, soft and devastating, then left me alone on the balcony with my thoughts and the growing certainty that I'd crossed every line I'd sworn not to cross, and that I'd cross them again, without hesitation, if it meant staying in his orbit. The next day dawned clear and bright, Monaco gleaming under Mediterranean sun. I dressed carefully, choosing a charcoal suit that projected authority and competence, my armor against the coming confrontation. The Meridian documentation was organized in a leather portfolio, each page flagged and annotated, evidence presented with the cold precision of mathematics. Baltazar's car collected me at noon. He was already inside, dressed in a black suit that made him look every inch the casino magnate, power and danger combined in perfect tailoring. "Ready?" he asked. I nodded, not trusting my voice. The Aurora Monte Carlo occupied prime real estate overlooking the harbor, all glass and marble and understated elegance. Baltazar's private office was on the top floor, a space designed to impress and intimidate. When we arrived, Ernesto was already there, pacing near the windows, his nervous energy more pronounced than it had been on the ship. He stopped when he saw me, recognition followed by calculation crossing his features. "The financial consultant from the cruise. I should have known you'd be involved. Ernesto." Baltazar's voice was ice. "Helena has been reviewing Aurora's financial records. She's found some inconsistencies I think you should see." I set the portfolio on the desk, opening it to the first documented fraud. "Meridian Holdings. You created it 5 years ago using forged incorporation documents and a false address in Luxembourg. It exists on paper only, has no actual assets or operations, yet you've used it as guarantor for 6 separate development projects." Ernesto's face paled, but he held his composure. "I don't know what you think you've found." "I've found 43 million euros in fraudulent loans," I continued, my voice steady and professional. "All secured through properties Aurora doesn't own, construction companies that don't exist, investor groups that are fictions. You've built an entire shadow empire using Baltazar's reputation and Aurora's credentials." I walked him through each project, each forged document, each traced transaction. With every revelation, Ernesto's composure cracked further, until by the end, he was gripping the desk's edge, his knuckles white. "This is thorough," he finally said, his voice tight. "But circumstantial. No court would—" "Every court would," I interrupted. "I've cross-referenced every signature against authenticated examples. I've traced every euro through its shell company journey back to your personal accounts. I've documented conversations with supposed investors who don't exist, and construction managers at companies that have no record of the projects they allegedly built." Baltazar moved to stand beside me, a united front. "It's over, Ernesto. The question now is how this ends. You can return the money, dissolve the false companies, and face legal consequences. Or I can show this evidence to our mutual contacts and let them handle it their way." Ernesto's laugh was bitter, desperate. "You think I have the money to return? It's already spent, Baltazar, invested in ventures that haven't matured, properties that won't yield returns for years. I can't just produce 43 million euros. "Then you should run," Baltazar said quietly. Because the people you've defrauded, the investors who trusted Aurora's name because they trusted me, they're going to want answers. And when they understand you've stolen from them using my business as cover, they won't wait for court dates. The threat hung in the air, explicit and undeniable. I'd helped engineer this moment, had built the evidence that made it possible. There was blood on my hands now, metaphorically, if not literally. Ernesto's eyes moved between us, calculating, desperate. "Helena," he said suddenly, "you're a legitimate consultant. You know that what he's threatening is illegal, that—" "What I know," I interrupted, "is that you built a sophisticated fraud operation and got caught. What happens next is between you and the people you stole from." I gathered my documentation, placed it back in the portfolio, and walked out of the office without looking back. In the elevator down, I began to shake. Baltazar's hand found mine, steady and warm. "You did well. I helped you threaten a man's life. You exposed fraud. What happens after that is consequence, not cause." The distinction felt semantic, philosophical rather than real. But I held on to it anyway, held on to his hand, held on to the possibility that I could be both the ethical consultant I'd always been and the woman who existed in gray areas beside a dangerous man. 3 hours later, Baltazar received word that Ernesto had left Monaco on a private flight to somewhere without extradition treaties. Running, just as Baltazar had suggested. But running wouldn't save him from the people he'd defrauded. We both knew that. I was in my suite packing when Baltazar appeared in my doorway. "You're leaving. I need time to process this, what I did today, what it means." I continued folding clothes with mechanical precision. "You said I could have space. I'm taking it. And after? After you've processed and thought and convinced yourself that you're walking away from all this?" I met his eyes. This man who'd unraveled my certainties in a week. "I don't know." He crossed the room, his hands framing my face with a gentleness that contrasted with everything else about him. "Then let me tell you what I know. You'll go back to Lisbon, to your clean ethical practice. You'll take legitimate clients and build straightforward cases, and you'll be bored senseless within a month. Maybe boredom is what I need." "Maybe," he agreed. "Or maybe you've finally found work that challenges you, that uses everything you're capable of instead of the safe subset you've allowed yourself. Maybe you've found someone who sees all of you, not just the parts that fit comfortable categories." His kiss was soft, questioning, a request rather than demand. I answered it by pulling him closer, by allowing myself this moment before I left, before I tried to reconstruct the boundaries he'd demolished. 3 months, I whispered against his mouth. "Give me 3 months to see if I can go back to who I was, and if I can't." "I'll be waiting," he promised, "in Monaco, building something legitimate alongside Aurora. A hotel venture, actually clean, that would benefit from a financial consultant with your expertise. Tempting me with honest work. Tempting you with possibility. With a future where you don't have to choose between your principles and your potential." He left me there, and I finished packing with tears on my cheeks that I couldn't fully explain. The next morning, I flew back to Lisbon, to my quiet apartment and organized life, and began the longest 3 months of my existence. Lisbon greeted me with autumn rain and familiar routines. I returned to my small consulting practice, to clients whose greatest drama involved disputed expense reports and optimistic revenue projections. My apartment felt smaller than I remembered, its careful organization now seeming more like constraint than comfort. Eduarda met me for coffee 3 days after my return, her expression carefully neutral. "You look different." I looked tired. I stirred sugar into my espresso with mechanical precision. It was intense work, the Aurora investigation. "Helena." She reached across the table, covering my restless hand with hers. "I'm not asking about the work. I'm asking about you, about what happened with Baltazar Suarez. Everything and nothing. I'd helped him destroy a man, had crossed every ethical line I'd ever drawn, had fallen into something that terrified and exhilarated me equally. And then I'd run, exactly as he'd predicted I would, back to the safety of clear boundaries and uncomplicated choices. We worked together," I said carefully. "Built a comprehensive fraud case. Ernesto Cardoso is gone, fled to avoid prosecution. Aurora's reputation will recover. It was successful consulting engagement. And the fact that you're miserable?" I looked up sharply. "I'm not miserable. You've reorganized your apartment twice in 3 days. You've taken on 4 new clients in a week. You're working 16-hour days on cases that should take 4 hours. You're drowning yourself in uncomplicated work because anything else reminds you of what you left behind in Monaco." The accuracy of her observation stung. I had been drowning, filling every moment with tasks that required no emotional engagement, nothing beyond surface-level analysis. My practice had never been busier or more tedious. "He offered me a position," I admitted quietly. "Consulting work on a legitimate hotel development project. Clean, ethical, the kind of work I've always done, just with better compensation and more complex scope." "But you turned it down." I needed space to think about what happened, about who I became while I was there. Eduarda was quiet for a moment, studying me with the perception that came from 8 years of friendship. "Helena, I've known you since graduate school. I've watched you build this practice from nothing, seen you turn down lucrative positions because they compromised your values. You're the most ethical consultant I know. So when you tell me you need to think about who you became, I have to ask, was it someone worse or someone more complete?" The question haunted me through the following weeks. I threw myself into work, took morning runs along the Tagus, reorganized my filing system for the 3rd time, did everything possible to avoid examining what Eduarda had identified. But Monaco lingered. In the quality of coffee I'd grown accustomed to, in the efficiency of document systems I'd designed in Baltazar's office, in the way I now saw patterns in financial reports that I'd previously missed. My time there had sharpened my skills, expanded my perspective, made me better at the work I'd always done. And I missed him. Missed the way he challenged my assumptions, the conversations that ranged beyond professional boundaries, the intensity of his focus when he looked at me like I was a puzzle worth solving. He didn't contact me directly, respected the space I'd requested with the same precision he brought to everything else. But I tracked Aurora's recovery through industry publications, saw the careful restructuring of partnerships, the strategic distance from Ernesto's fraud. Baltazar was rebuilding, exactly as we'd planned. 2 months into my self-imposed exile, a courier delivered a package to my office. Inside was a prospectus for a hotel development project in Portofino, Italy. The numbers were solid, projections reasonable, risk assessments appropriately conservative. Everything a legitimate hospitality venture should be. Clipped to the front page was a handwritten note in Baltazar's bold script. "For when you finish thinking. The position remains available. B.S." I studied the prospectus with professional focus, analyzing cash flow projections, examining construction timelines, verifying contractor credentials. It was clean, completely, thoroughly legitimate. The kind of project I would have been excited to consult on for any other client. But this wasn't any other client. This was Baltazar, offering me a way back into his world through the front door, with clean hands and clear conscience. I set the prospectus aside and tried to forget about it. 3 weeks later, I was reviewing a client's quarterly reports when my phone rang. Unknown number, Monaco area code. "Helena Reynolds," I answered professionally. "Ms. Reynolds." A woman's voice, crisp and efficient. "My name is Andrea Monti. I'm the project manager for the Portofino hotel development. Mr. Soares suggested I contact you regarding the financial consulting position." My heart hammered against my ribs. I haven't accepted any position. I understand you're still considering. However, I wanted to make contact and offer to answer any questions about the project's scope, timeline, or operational structure. Mr. Suarez has been very clear that this is a legitimate business venture and that he wants a consultant who will maintain the highest ethical standards. We talked for 20 minutes. Andrea was knowledgeable, professional, clearly competent in hospitality development. The project sounded genuinely exciting, the kind of complex challenge that would use my full skill set rather than the fraction I currently employed. I'll think about it, I said finally. Of course. Though I should mention we're hoping to bring someone on board within the next month. The financing is already secured, and we'd like the consultant in place before construction begins. After she hung up, I sat staring at my organized office, my uncomplicated client list, my safe, ethical, increasingly empty life. Eduarda's words echoed. Was it someone worse, or someone more complete? That evening, I did something I'd been avoiding for 3 months. I pulled out the evidence files from the Ernesto investigation, the documentation I'd kept copies of despite knowing I should probably destroy them. I studied my own work with the critical eye I brought to everything. The analysis was brilliant, some of the best fraud detection I'd ever done. I'd traced patterns no one else had identified, connected dots that seemed unconnectable, built a case that was both comprehensive and airtight. I'd been exceptional in Monaco, not despite the gray areas, but because of them. The high stakes, the complex motivations, the need to see beyond simple right and wrong to larger patterns of justice and consequence. All of it had pushed me to operate at a level I'd never reached in conventional consulting, and I'd been happier, more engaged, more alive. The realization settled over me with the weight of inevitability. I could stay in Lisbon, could continue building a practice that was successful and ethical, and fundamentally unsatisfying. Or I could accept that my time in Monaco had shown me what I was truly capable of, had introduced me to work that challenged everything I had to offer. And to a man who saw all of me, not just the safe parts. I picked up my phone and dialed before I could second-guess the decision. Baltazar Suarez. His voice sent a shiver down my spine. It's Helena. Silence. Waited and waiting. I'd like to review the Portofino prospectus in person, I said. Discuss the scope of the consulting role, timeline expectations, compensation structure. When can you be in Monaco? Is Friday too soon? His laugh was low, satisfied. Friday is perfect. I hung up and sat in the sudden quiet of my apartment, my heart racing with decision made, bridges burned, future uncertain. Eduarda arrived an hour later, summoned by a text that said simply, "I'm going back." "Monaco?" she asked, though she clearly already knew. I nodded. The hotel project is legitimate, clean work, ethical scope, everything I said I needed, but that's not why I'm going. I know why you're going. She settled onto my couch, studying me with concern and something that might have been approval. The question is whether you know. Because I'm in love with a dangerous man who operates in gray areas I spent my career avoiding. Because 3 months of safe, ethical work has been suffocating. Because I want to build something complex and challenging instead of just maintaining what already exists. And because you trust him. Eduarda said it quietly, stating fact rather than question. Did I trust Baltazar? He'd been honest about his business, transparent about the risks, respectful of my boundaries even when pushing against them. He'd given me space when I asked, hadn't pressured or manipulated, had simply offered possibility, and waited for me to decide. Yes, I said, I trust him. Maybe that makes me naive or compromised or reckless. But I trust him. Then go. Eduarda squeezed my hand. Go build your complicated, ethically ambiguous, probably incredible future. Just promise me you'll call if you need extraction. I promise. Though we both knew I wouldn't need it. Friday dawned clear and bright. I boarded the flight to Monaco with a single suitcase and a sense of stepping off a cliff into unknown territory. But this time, I wasn't running toward safety. I was running toward possibility. Baltazar met me at the airport himself. No driver, no entourage. He stood beside a sleek gray car, dressed casually in dark slacks and a white shirt, and the sight of him made my breath catch. Helena. He didn't move to embrace me, respecting the space that still existed between decision made and commitment lived. Welcome back. I'm here to discuss the consulting position, I said, falling back on professional formality because the alternative was too overwhelming. Of course. His smile suggested he knew exactly what I was doing. Andrea has prepared a presentation. The project office is in the hotel itself, about 20 minutes from here. We drove along the coast, conversation carefully neutral, discussing construction timelines and financial projections. But the air between us was charged with everything unsaid, with 3 months of absence, and the decision that had brought me back. The hotel was magnificent, a restored Belle Epoque building overlooking the harbor, currently undergoing renovation. Andrea met us in the project office, a converted ballroom filled with architectural models and development plans. Her presentation was thorough, professional, exactly what I needed to assess the project's viability. The numbers were solid, the timeline realistic, the scope challenging but achievable. It was everything a legitimate consulting engagement should be. Questions? Andrea asked after finishing. I had dozens, all of them professional, all of them easily addressed. But the real question remained unasked, the one that had nothing to do with hotel development and everything to do with the man who'd created this opportunity. I'd like to discuss compensation and terms with Mr. Soares privately, I said. Andrea nodded, gathering her materials with diplomatic efficiency. Of course, I'll be in the construction office if you need anything. After she left, Baltazar leaned against the table, his casual posture at odds with the intensity in his dark eyes. Well, does the project meet your ethical standards? It's completely legitimate, clean, well-structured, the kind of work I'd be excited to take on. I moved closer, closing the physical distance that mirrored the emotional gap we'd maintained. But we both know that's not what I'm really here to discuss. No? His hand came up, fingers brushing my jaw with the gentleness I remembered. Then what are you here to discuss, Helena? Whether I can build a life that includes both my principles and my potential. Whether there's space for someone like me in your world. Whether you meant what you said about finding someone who sees all of you. I meant every word. His thumb traced my lower lip, and I felt the touch everywhere. The question is whether you believe it enough to stay. I'm here, aren't I? You're here to review a consulting contract. That's not the same as staying. He was right. I could take the position, could keep this professional, could maintain the boundaries that protected me from complete vulnerability. Or I could admit what had brought me back to Monaco, what had made 3 months in Lisbon feel like exile. I'm in love with you, I said, the words terrifying and liberating in equal measure. I fought it for 3 months, tried to convince myself it was just attraction or professional fascination or temporary madness. But I'm in love with you, Baltazar, with your complications and gray areas and dangerous world, with the way you see me as something more than I allow myself to be. His kiss was answer and question, promise and challenge. I melted into it, into him, surrendering the last of my carefully maintained distance. When we finally pulled apart, his forehead rested against mine. I fell first, he said quietly. On the ship, when you landed in my lap and looked at me with those sharp eyes that saw too much. I knew then that you were dangerous to me, that you would change everything. And you let me anyway. I encouraged it. His smile was self-deprecating. I created this entire hotel project because I knew you'd need a legitimate reason to come back. Needed to be able to tell yourself this was about work, about ethical consulting, about anything except the fact that we're inevitable. I laughed, the sound edged with tears. You built a 10 million euro hotel development as cover for asking me back? I built a legitimate business opportunity that would satisfy your principles while giving me more time to prove we work together. In every sense of the word. That's manipulative and romantic in equal measure. That's who I am. He pulled me closer, his arms encircling me with certainty. Gray areas, Helena. I told you that on the first night. Everything with me exists in gray areas. But I promise you this. I will never lie to you. Never hide my world from you. Never ask you to compromise your core values for my benefit. Just expand my definition of what those values allow. Exactly. I stayed in Monaco, took the consulting position, moved into an apartment near the project office, threw myself into the hotel development with the focus it deserved. The work was challenging, complex, everything I'd been missing in Lisbon. And every evening, I had dinner with Baltazar, conversations that continued to expand my understanding of his world, of the gray areas where legitimate business and shadow operations overlapped without ever quite touching. 3 months became 6. 6 became a year. The hotel project progressed. My consulting expanded to other Aurora ventures, all of them legitimate, all of them operating within legal bounds while serving clients who existed in shadows. I learned to navigate that world, to see the distinctions between service and complicity, between providing opportunity and endorsing activity. I learned that Baltazar was exactly what he'd claimed, a man who operated in gray areas, but with clear personal code. And I learned that I could love him without losing myself, could expand my principles without abandoning them. The gray areas, it turned out, had room for both of us. 5 years after I fell into Baltazar's lap on a cruise ship, I stood in the lobby of our 10th hotel, watching sunlight stream through restored Belle Epoque windows and thinking about inevitability. The Portofino property had been just the beginning. After its success, we'd expanded throughout Italy, then into Greece, Croatia, Montenegro. Each hotel a restoration of historic properties, each one financially sound and ethically clean. My consulting had evolved into partnership, my temporary position into permanent investment, and my relationship with Baltazar had evolved from something dangerous and uncertain into something that felt like destiny. Nervous? His voice at my shoulder still sent a shiver down my spine, even after 5 years of hearing it daily. About the opening? No. The hotel is perfect. The numbers are solid. We're booked through next spring. I turned to face him, this man who'd unraveled my certainties and rebuilt them into something stronger. About your speech? Moderately terrified. He laughed, the sound genuine and warm. At 47, Baltazar had changed in subtle ways. Silver threaded through his dark hair now, lines around his eyes that came from laughter more often than stress. The Aurora casinos still existed, still operated in their gray areas, but he'd gradually shifted focus to the hotels, to legitimate ventures that didn't require looking the other way. Because of me, he claimed. Because I'd shown him that building something clean could be just as satisfying as maintaining something complex. The speech is simple, he said, his hand finding the small of my back in a gesture that had become habit. Thank the investors, praise the restoration team, celebrate the partnership that made all this possible. And by partnership, you mean? Us. His eyes held mine, dark and certain. Always us, Helena. The opening ceremony was magnificent. Local officials, investors, hospitality industry leaders, all gathered in the hotel's renovated grand ballroom. I stood to the side as Baltazar took the microphone, watching him command the room with the same natural authority he brought to everything. He thanked the appropriate people, praised the restoration work, outlined the hotel's commitment to preserving history while providing modern luxury, all the expected elements of an opening speech. Then he paused, his eyes finding mine across the room. "But there's one person I haven't properly thanked," he continued, his voice carrying that slight accent that still made my heart race. "The woman who transformed this venture from business opportunity into passion project, who brought ethical rigor and financial brilliance to every property we've developed, who expanded my understanding of what success could mean." I felt heat rise to my face as attention shifted to me. Helena Reynolds joined this project 5 years ago as a consultant. She's become my business partner, my closest advisor, and the reason these hotels exist as they do, clean and legitimate, and built to last generations. He set down the microphone and crossed the room to where I stood, taking my hand in his. "She's also the woman I fell in love with on a cruise ship, though it took me years to admit it properly." The room had gone silent, every eye on us. This was not a standard opening speech. "I told her once that I fell first," Baltazar continued, his voice softer now but still audible in the hushed space. "On the ship, when she landed in my lap and looked at me with eyes that saw too much and demanded honesty I wasn't ready to give. I knew then that she would change everything. And she has." He released my hand only to withdraw a small velvet box from his pocket. My breath caught. "Helena, you've spent 5 years expanding your principles to include me, learning to navigate gray areas you once avoided, building something extraordinary despite every logical reason to walk away." He opened the box, revealing a ring that caught the light like captured stars. "Now I'm asking you to expand those principles one more time, to include permanence, to build not just business ventures, but a life, to stay in my gray areas forever." The proposal was so perfectly him, mixing romance with pragmatism, emotion with clear-eyed assessment of what we'd built together. I looked at the ring, at his face, at the room full of people watching this intimate moment become public declaration. "You're proposing at a business opening," I said, my voice unsteady with tears and laughter, "in front of investors and officials and hospitality industry leaders. I'm proposing where we began, building something together, with witnesses to hold us accountable." His smile was soft, vulnerable in a way he rarely allowed others to see. "Say yes, Helena. Say you'll stay." I thought about the woman I'd been 5 years ago, rigidly ethical, carefully boundaried, convinced that gray areas were places to avoid rather than navigate. I thought about everything I'd learned since, about the expansion of my principles rather than their abandonment, about discovering that integrity could exist in complexity. I thought about the hotels we'd built, the partnerships we'd forged, the life we'd created that honored both his world and mine. "Yes," I said, my voice carrying across the silent room. "I'll stay. I'll build with you. I'll navigate every gray area as long as we navigate them together." The ring slid onto my finger with perfect precision, because of course Baltazar had gotten the sizing exactly right. He'd probably had it made months ago, waiting for the perfect moment to use it. The room erupted in applause, but I barely heard it. I was focused on the man in front of me, on the kiss that sealed our engagement, on the future spreading before us like Monaco had once spread before the jet window, beautiful and complex and full of possibility. Later, after the ceremony concluded and guests mingled in the restored ballroom, Eduarda found me on the terrace overlooking Portofino's harbor. She'd flown in for the opening, now ran her own consulting practice in Lisbon, and remained my closest friend despite the physical distance. "You said yes," she observed, joining me at the railing. I said yes. I studied the ring, its simple elegance so different from the ostentatious jewelry I might have expected from a man in Baltazar's position. "Are you disappointed?" "In you? Never." She squeezed my hand. "5 years ago I was worried, thought you were compromising yourself for a dangerous man. But you haven't compromised, Helena. You've evolved. built something that honors both who you were and who you've become. He's still involved with Aurora, still operates in those gray areas, but he's transparent about it. And you've created your own space, your own work that exists in the light. She gestured at the hotel behind us. This is yours as much as his. Maybe more, since you're the one who insisted on complete legitimacy. She was right. The hotels were mine in ways the casinos never could be. I'd structured every deal, verified every transaction, ensured that nothing about our hospitality ventures existed in shadow. Baltazar had given me complete autonomy, had respected my need for clean work, even as he maintained his other interests. He's giving me Aurora, I said quietly. Transitioning full ownership of the casinos to managed investment, stepping away from daily operations. The hotels will be our focus, our legacy. Eduarda's eyes widened. He's leaving the casino business? For you? For us? For the future we're building. I turned to face her fully. The casinos will continue existing. We'll still serve their clientele, but at arm's length. Managed by professionals, operated within strict legal guidelines, separate from our hospitality ventures. That's significant distance from the man you met on the ship. 5 years is significant time. People change. We've changed each other. That night, after the last guest departed and the hotel settled into quiet luxury, Baltazar and I stood in the owner's suite, watching Portofino's lights reflect off dark water. Having second thoughts? He asked, coming to stand behind me, his arms encircling my waist. About marrying you? No. I leaned back against his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady against my spine. About this life we've built? Never. Even knowing I'll always exist partially in gray areas, that some of my business will never be completely clean? Especially knowing that. I turned in his arms to face him. Because you've never lied about who you are, never hidden your world or asked me to ignore it. You've given me space to build clean ventures while respecting what you believe is necessary in other areas. His kiss was soft, grateful. You've made me better, Helena. Not perfect, not completely reformed, but better. More thoughtful about consequences, more careful about lines between gray and black. And you've made me more complete. Shown me that principles can bend without breaking, that integrity can exist in complexity. We made love that night in sheets that smelled of new luxury, in a hotel we'd built together, in a future we'd chosen despite every logical reason to walk away. And in the morning, we began planning our next property, our next venture, our next step into the gray areas we'd learned to navigate together. 3 months later, we married in a small ceremony in Monaco, witnessed by Eduarda and a handful of close associates. No grand production, no society spectacle, just vows exchanged with the same honesty that had characterized everything between us. The hotels continued expanding. 12 properties by our 2nd anniversary, 15 by the 5th. Each one a testament to what could be built when someone from the light partnered with someone from shadows, when principles expanded rather than abandoned, when gray areas became space for growth rather than compromise. Aurora transitioned exactly as Baltazar promised, moving to managed operations that maintained profitability while removing him from daily involvement. He consulted occasionally, maintained relationships with key clients, but his focus shifted to the legitimate empire we were building together. And I discovered that the woman I'd become, the one who could love a complicated man while maintaining her core integrity, was more satisfied than the rigid consultant I'd been before. The gray areas had room for both of us, had space for clean work and complex relationships, for principled decisions and pragmatic flexibility. 7 years after I fell into Baltazar's lap, we stood together at the opening of our 20th hotel, this one in Dubrovnik, looking out over the Adriatic and talking about expansion into Spain, Portugal, the markets I knew from my early consulting days. Ambitious, I observed, reviewing the preliminary numbers he'd prepared. Always. His hand found mine, fingers intertwining in a gesture as natural as breathing. But we've built something that can support that ambition, something clean and sustainable and completely ours. Ours. The word that defined everything we'd created. Not his world or mine, but ours, forged from compromise and expansion, from love that survived complexity, and principles that bent without breaking. That evening, as we celebrated another successful opening, another property added to our growing portfolio, I thought about the consultant I'd been on that cruise ship. Rigid, boundaried, convinced that clear lines separated right from wrong, ethical from corrupt, light from shadow. I thought about how Baltazar had challenged those certainties, had shown me that gray areas weren't spaces to avoid, but to navigate thoughtfully. That integrity could exist in complexity, that principles could expand to encompass more dimensions than I'd allowed myself to see, and I thought about the future spreading before us, full of hotels to build, and ventures to launch, and gray areas to navigate together. No regrets? Baltazar asked, appearing at my side with champagne, his eyes reflecting the question seriously. I looked at the ring on my finger, at the hotel we'd built, at the life we'd created from impossible beginnings. Not one, I said, meaning it completely. Not a single one, because I discovered that falling into Baltazar's lap hadn't been an accident. It had been the beginning of understanding that the most important things in life exist in gray areas, in spaces between certainty and doubt, in the complexity that comes from loving someone who challenges everything you thought you knew about yourself. And that staying there, in those gray areas, building something extraordinary despite the complications, was the most principled choice I'd ever made. We raised our glasses to the future, to the next hotel, to the next 20 years of navigating complexity together, to gray areas that had become home,